Erika, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to speak with you this morning.
Thank you for inviting me with the great contributions that you're making to our communities. So I'm really glad to participate.
Well, I want to start off just hearing about your story. Tell us a little bit about you, your history, and how you got to be where you are today in your career.
Oh boy, I'm 60, so it's a long story. I was born and raised in Mexico, and when I was 20, I moved to Canada. So I did all my education here. I'm a mother of two adult women. So because I went through that, so being a mom, I had a pretty big interest in parenting and motherhood. So pretty well all the research I did in university since my undergrad related to families and their children. As I went along in my journey, one of my daughters struggled with a lot of anxiety when she was a teenager, and that was very hard for me. It was very beyond stressful, really. It was very serious. Her anxiety would turn to depression, so on. So then I needed something. Like I needed something, and I happened to go to a training, and they spoke about mindfulness. This training was for psychologists who support people with eating disorders. And I just bought a book by the Dalai Lama. I had never read any of his work, and that's the meditation he practices as well. So from a professional area and a personal area, I came to mindfulness, and I became very interested because of my work, but also for my personal life. And that's really what carried me through the many years of her struggles. So you could almost say that motherhood and mindfulness are like two separate interests in my life, and they can look like that. Sometimes I'm doing mindfulness has nothing to do with motherhood and so on. But for me, my interest in motherhood and my being a mother in a way is what led me to take a big interest in mindfulness. So ever since then, I've done a lot of different trainings in mindfulness. I've gone to numerous retreats. I meditate every day. I used to be the director of counseling services at SFU for about 12 years. And I brought mindfulness to SFU. I had a drop-in mindfulness open to staff and faculty. I had several groups that I encouraged my staff to offer. One was based on dialectical behavior therapy, which is a mindfulness-based therapy. So I, had a big interest in bringing that to people as well. So today I'm in private practice, and a lot of the work I offer includes mindfulness. And I'm still a mother to two adult daughters, so that's still a thing. And so mindfulness has been a very helpful way for me to navigate my experience as a mom.
Interesting. And this acronym has popped up a few times. It also appears on your work and your website. What is MBSR? What does that stand for, and what does it mean?
So MBSR is mindfulness-based stress reduction, and it is a program that was developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. He began his work because he worked in a university hospital, and there was many patients who lived in pain or had health issues that doctors didn't know what else to do. So he thought, well, maybe if we do yoga and mindfulness, maybe that'll help them. This was back in 1979, and there's a lot of research that's been done in that. So as part of my journey in 2009, I think it was 2010, I did all the training at the University of Massachusetts to become a mindfulness-based stress reduction certified teacher. And the program is really an 8-week program that offers not only learning how to practice mindfulness meditation, but it also teaches you a lot about how the mind works, how we are conditioned to react, and so on and so forth. It's a pretty remarkable course. I mean, when I offered it at SFU, and I've offered it through my private practice. The sentence I hear the most, or that I've gotten emails or texts, is that that it's life-changing. And I would say that for me, it was life-changing to learn mindfulness. Yeah.
That's so cool. So tell me a little bit about what that looks like for your clients, when you're incorporating mindfulness-based stress reduction into their lives. Are you teaching them how to meditate? What are you teaching them, or what are you telling them to encompass into their lives?
Well, I can start by saying what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is really the practice of present moments awareness. And our awareness, like if you say, what am I aware of right now? The things you're aware of come through your senses, through what you see, you hear, you smell, you touch. But also, if you pay attention to your present moment's experience, you will also notice what's happening in your inner world, whether it's sensations in the body or emotions that manifest as sensations or thoughts. So mindfulness is the present moment's awareness of all of that. So it's like practicing mindfulness is like creating this container of awareness where you see everything that's entering, you observe what's entering your awareness. So part of what you're aware of is your thoughts. And to me, as a psychologist and somebody that started studying psychology in 1983, when I took my first class in my undergrad, it's one of the greatest things that's come to our field because it explains the mind in a way that helps us realize that our thoughts are not, they're not all true, factual, or helpful, right? They just are like, I think of the mind as a factory of thoughts, right? It just produces thoughts and thoughts, like the Twinkie factory that just pours out, the dough onto the, the baking pans. And so it's constantly doing that. And the problem is that we tend to identify or believe those thoughts. And that's where we get in trouble. So mindfulness teaches us, oh, there's that thought. Oh, that thought is telling me that I'm going to fail the exam or that I'm not going to get that job. It's just a thought. It's neurons firing, really, it's what it is. So when you're able to say, oh, there's that thought, you're no longer in the thought, you're watching the thought. And that gives you distance to, in a way, discern if it's a thought worth investing in, or you can just let it pass. And so then you can invite the mind, instead of being in that thought, to come to this moment. And you can use your senses. What am I seeing right now? What am I hearing? What am I smelling? And that brings you back. It's a very simple way of bringing you back. So the mindfulness, pretty well all the therapies or the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, a lot of its benefit is the ability to observe experience without getting pulled by the experience.
And the mind-blowing fact that you are not your thoughts, that is such a different way of thinking. It's a different way of feeling and knowing. And I think it's so important that you to understand you are not your thoughts. Your thoughts, like you said, are you used a gesture where they're apart from you. They're over here, so to speak. And you are here and they are separate from you. And drawing that observation, that ability to observe thoughts, that sounds easier than it is, I think, right? Because our minds go and we think our minds are ourselves and our minds just continue to go. So you said you meditate every day. I want to hear a little bit more about how you keep yourself separate from your thoughts. What's your practice? What tricks work for you in your day-to-day?
Well, there's a thing with the practice of mindfulness that when you sit to do an actual meditation, we call that formal mindfulness, right? Formal practice. What you are doing is you're cultivating your ability to bring that to the rest of your day, which is what we call informal practice. So by sitting there, mindfulness meditation is pretty well focusing usually on the breath, but you can focus on a sound or a sensation. It's like you intentionally focus your attention, but as you're doing that, your mind wanders, right? It goes, it does its thing. But because you're sitting in that committed posture to observe, you eventually realize your mind has wandered. And in that moment, when you realize that it's wandered, you take a moment to note, where did it go? So you start gaining insight into what's my mind doing? You start realizing things. In fact, mindfulness meditation is also known as insight meditation because it really is about observing the mind. So when you do that on an ongoing basis, what you get better at is realizing you are the observer, not the thoughts, right? You are the awareness. So when you have pain in your knee, is the awareness in pain? No. Is the observer in pain? No. The knee is where it's in pain. So as you cultivate that, you get better at watching and understanding the mind. So one conclusion I've come to in doing all this work with, in my psychologist practice and in my own practice, is that a lot of our thoughts are involuntary. They're involuntary. You don't sit there and torture yourself with the fear that you're not going to pass the exam or get the job. Who will do that? Right?
Yeah.
So when you realize that they're involuntary, now with neuroscience, we know that when we're thinking, our neurons are firing. And that when you have certain habits, like say anxious thinking or depressive thinking, they find that there are neural pathways that fire the same way. So they're very automatic. So you ask me how I apply this or way, I don't know that, we can say they're tricksters. So, but you learn to watch yourself. And when you watch yourself in the mindfulness class, we say that when you don't practice mindfulness and awareness, you're in an automatic pilot of reactivity. Something triggers you to react. With mindfulness, because you're better at observing, you're triggered, you're observing, you feel angry or frustrated or afraid, but because you're watching it, you create a space to be able to respond. So we say rather than reacting, we learn to respond. And one of the mindfulness therapies called acceptance and commitment therapy speaks about how that responding can be based on your values, for me, on your principles. So if I hold a principle that I want to be about respect in the world, right? And somebody triggers me, then I want to respond in a respectful way, even if I'm angry and I want to slap them and swear at them, right? With mindfulness, I'm aware I'm triggered. I'm aware I'm angry. I'm aware I want to attack. But in my awareness, I choose to respond from a place of the committed values and principles that I carry with me. And so for me, that's how I live my life. It's really helped me to have more ability to respond in a way that is in integrity with the vision of who I want to be in the world.
So you have a formal practice that helps you tune these kind of capabilities to then take that off your meditation and into your life and throughout every exchange in your life. It sounds like I think that's the goal, right? That's the end goal of this type of practice. What about for the wildly busy people? I struggle. I am a mom too. I have, a job and lots of things going on, lots of titles that I wear in my life. And, how do you deal, or how do you advise people that are just way too busy to sit and think about a meditation practice? And how do you advise them to start incorporating these types of tools into their lives?
When I did the training, my very first training for becoming a mindfulness teacher was with John Kabat-Zinn. I got lucky. I was one of the last. Yes, I met him. I hugged him. I took pictures with him. I gave him a gift and it was beautiful. I remember doing the body scan and saying, I don't want to fall asleep. I want to hear the whole thing. Anyways, like he would say, for the mindfulness-based stress reduction, people are expected to practice 45 minutes a day. And I remember thinking, there's no way we can get people to do 45. And I was in a university setting at the time, so a lot of the people I used to support were students. And so I raised my hand and I said, I don't know about that. And he said, well, you have to ask of people and have faith in them and they will deliver, is what he said. So, he's an optimist, obviously. The two things there, it is very hard to establish a daily practice. It took me about 5 years. I was lucky that in my work, I used to run a Wednesday drop-in, right? So I thought, well, if nobody shows up, I'll just meditate by myself. So I would teach mindfulness based groups. So I would, guide meditation, but I would do it there. And then my commitment was that when I'm falling asleep, I'll fall asleep meditating. So then every day. So that's the first suggestion I make. You lie down to go to sleep, right? So if you turn off that light and you close your eyes, go straight into meditation. Focus on your breath, the journey of the in-breath, the journey of the out-breath. So I did that for a few years. And then I went to Jon Kabat-Zinn's training, that first 8-day training. I don't know what he said or what he did, that when I came back, I started practicing every day. There's just if you read any of his books, there's something about when I read his books that really get me motivated to keep it up. So he's a good resource to read, Jon Kabat-Zinn. He has several
It sounds
books.
like you were really inspired and you drank the Kool-Aid and
absolutely. And once you do it every day, to me, I mean, it's been since, I think I did that training in 2010. It's really like brushing teeth. And if for any reason, I'm not able, like the last 2 days, I started work at 8. So I wasn't able to get up at 5 to meditate. It's okay, because this morning I got up and I came down and sat in my spot and did my meditation. So first of all, you have the commitment. You have to just believe that you can do it. And in the class, I say to people, look at your week. Look at your week. You have your calendar. You got to drop the kids off. You have this podcast. You have, this appointment. You have this. And you will see the gaps where you could insert 15 minutes. 45 sounds awesome. And yes, that's, but a lot of people, when they can't do the 45, then they don't do anything. So I always say, if you can start with that. The second thing I would suggest is the informal practice. The very first retreat I took, Kamala Harris, I think is her name. She's a meditation teacher. She told us that when she started learning mindfulness, she was a mother of 2 or 3 kids, maybe a single mom. She used to do meditation when she washed dishes. She used to do meditation when she showered, when she cleaned the floor. And the way you do that is you just pay attention to your senses in that activity. So if you're washing dishes, you would notice the smell of the soap. You would look at the bubbles. You would hear the sound of the water. You would feel the sensation of the water and the soap in your hands. That's mindfulness. So if any of you are very busy, you could just make that intention, set the intention that you will practice mindfulness. The other suggestion I've made is decide on one activity you do every day to be your practice if you can't sit and do formal practice. So you can say, every time I wash my hands. We wash our hands several times a day, particularly nowadays, right? So make that your meditation. Do the 20 seconds or however long it takes, really paying attention to the sensations of the water, the soap, the drying of your hands, and then just take 1 5-second check-in. How am I doing right now? Oh, I feel rushed. Oh, I feel tension in my chest, or I feel really open and happy, and then carry on. So we can keep it alive with those little bits.
Little bite-sized pieces for those that aren't quite ready to do the sitting formal practice. I love that. One of the things that I like to do is when I'm driving, I like to see if I can feel the sun on somewhere on my body, paying attention to the road and all that stuff. But can I feel the heat of the sun anywhere on my body right now through the window? Something that I like to do. And it's so small, but it brings you back into your body. And I find that when we're making decisions in business, sometimes just the cue of where are you feeling this in your body right now? It's super weird for people. They are like, excuse me, what did you just say? But I find that it really gets to clarity fast. It's like a secret weapon trick where are you feeling this in your body? What's your body telling you about this decision right now? And if people just take a moment, then all of a sudden, not every time, but a lot of the time, some kind of clarity will bubble to the surface for them. It's a superpower, the checking in. Yeah. I want to talk about your research. I know it was a while ago, but you started talking about it with respect to the mom factor and the female factor. Can we talk a little bit about your research and your book? What I think we know what inspired you to do that now with the story of your daughter. Is that what inspired you to do that research, or was that before?
Oh, it was way before.
Way before. So tell us about this path and what you studied and what you learned. I think it's really helpful for us to understand.
I think if you look at researchers, most of the time somebody researches something that they've experienced or somebody they love has gone through. Or so, of course, me being a mother, it's not only that I was a mother, is that I had a bit of a rough childhood. And when I grew up, I wanted to not give them a rough childhood, right? So if you look at my book, I tell the story of how I thought I was going to raise my daughters without ever needing therapy, which is a joke, really. I mean, I realized soon after that was, so then I used to joke with them. I was ironing spot by spot on a white onesie because my daughter wanted to be a Dalmatian for Halloween. And so I was ironing spot by spot, those sticky things all over. And I said to her, if you're ever at a therapist's office and you're talking about how angry you are at me, you remember this moment that I'm ironing this. And, it was just a joke, right? Like we're always laughing. So eventually I realized that it wasn't possible. But I really, as a psychologist, I felt that first, I was very interested in preventing children from growing up with trauma. So I developed a parenting class, and as I evolved, I started feeling for the mothers, the challenge of mothers. So one day I was at a mall, and I went through a bookstore. They had a sale, and I saw this book about the history of motherhood. I thought, oh, that sounds cool. Excellent book. Wow. So as I read it, she goes from the beginnings, like, the prehistoric times almost, to modern times, and how kids have been mothered so differently throughout history and throughout cultures. So then that said to me, wow, well, there's not really one way to mother, right? So then I decided that I was going to do my research on motherhood. And then when I started my PhD, talking to my professors that supervised me, we looked at how there's been the concept of mothers being oppressed in society was well documented, right? That the patriarchal approach to society oppressed mothers, right? They told them you have to be perfect, you have to be present, you have to be loving, you have to da-da-da-da-da. But nobody had looked at women who had actually woken up and realized that was, societal pressures. And so then I looked at resistance, right? Women who resist, who rebel. And so that's how it came about. At first I thought, where am I going to find these people? We all buy into this. We call it the discourse of motherhood, right? Like the set of beliefs and myths about what a mother should be. You should be present. You should be empathic. You should put their needs before yours. You're not going to do it well if you go to work, et cetera, et cetera. But were there mothers out there who had figured out that this is, patriarchal myths? And there was, when I put out this is 2001 or 2002, so we didn't have the web as it is today. I mean, the web existed, but put out an ad somehow in some blogs or something, and I got responses from all over the world. I ended up only interviewing local people. We didn't have this Zoom stuff yet and so on, right? That's how long it was. And so I ended up finding these women that saw themselves as rebelling against these beliefs.
Mm-hmm. And when you look at today, 20 years later, compared to back then, have you personally seen shifts and growth and more equity in the world with respect to how mothers are expected to behave? Or is it similar now that it was 20 years ago?
I know 20 years ago, you think we would have evolved. I'm not really seeing, I don't think that discourse has changed. There was a book that was written around the time that I was doing my literature review called Perfect Madness, on this woman that lived in England for a few years and then came back to the US. And I guess in England where she lived, it was quite different. I mean, the pressure on mothers wasn't as bad. And she documents the degrees of anxiety that mothers have, because today you're still getting the message that your kids can get screwed up if you don't do it right. That's still present, right? You're still told that you need to be empathic and loving. And if you're not, your kids are going to end up with mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as soon as you hear, sadly, that some young kid has gone and shot half a high school, the first thing people think is bad family to this day. That hasn't changed. So even though my research goes back, incredibly 2 decades, my observation and experience is that, people today still live in fear, really, with certain anxiety or fear, that if they don't do it right or give their kids all the opportunities or protect their self-esteem, the kids are going to grow up messed up. I mean, today you're hearing about helicopter parents, right? And helicopter parents, which I really have an issue with the label because it's a judgmental label. They're only a product of what they're being told, that if you're very involved, if you're very loving, if you're very empathic, if you're very present, you're going to give your kids the best chance. But the sad thing is that experiment hasn't worked. When I worked at SFU with the population of young people who had been raised in this manner, they were having a harder time
coping,
dealing with stress than young people 20 or 30 years before. And I heard it from professors, actually. My favorite professor from my undergrad that I met in 1986, in 2004 or 5, I had coffee with him, and he said to me, "What's happening? Why are the students so much more anxious than they were 20, 30 years ago?" So that's not, and I'm not saying that they're anxious because of parenting. They just really feel like they need the parents' involvement, right? And that's where
they've never had to figure anything difficult out for themselves, maybe, and they've always had that helper in their lives. Interesting. Well, let's talk about that. I have a daughter, she's 7, and I'm very interested in making sure this social construct is obliterated by the time she's my age. So what can I do? I mean, really the only people that are going to fix this are the mothers. Like, we can't wait for men to change, right? We have to support each other. We have to create a sisterhood and support each other in this rebellious, what is perfect motherhood bullshit that is untrue and mythical. And so, what can we do differently, as mothers of children today? One of the things that comes to mind is just supporting each other. If like creating that village, right? Okay, you're going away for work, I got you. Well, let me drive her to gymnastics for you. Like that kind of thing, that village mentality comes to mind for me. What else can we do? What else can we do to obliterate these social constructs in your mind?
Well, the study I did, one of the findings was that these women that I interviewed had caught on to the fact that there is a social discourse that comes from, it actually comes from after the Second World War, right? Women were working during the war. And so when the men came back, they had to get women back in the house. So then this whole ideology of you're the one that belongs in the home and you're the one that can nurture and you're the, that's kind of how it started evolving. So these women had caught on to that and were questioning it. So the first suggestion I would make is question your beliefs, right? Like, where do they come from? Do you really believe that your kids are that fragile? Because it's not only the discourse of motherhood, you got to be present, you got to be empathic, you have to put their needs first and all that stuff. It's that there's a discourse of childhood. If you look at the history of childhood, you go back a century or two, and there was a time where kids were seen as evil because they were born from the sin.
Yes.
Seriously, that's where baptism comes from in the Catholic Church, right? That they have to remove the sin. And so they were annoyances. There was a time in history where there was high baby mortality. And so the moms, the upper classes moms would give their babies to a wet nurse for a year or two. The baby survived and they would be returned. So when you see that history, you see that humanity has survived, right? Of course, we have knowledge today that kids need secure attachments. They need to feel safe. They need to feel loved. That's not changed. But love has turned into sacrifice. Love has turned into they count more than you. And I'm thinking, if you have a family of 3 or 4 with 1 or 2 children, why are the kids more worthy or valuable than the parents? That makes no sense to me, right? So I would say question this thing that's making you anxious. Oh my God, I didn't put the kids to bed for 2 nights in a row. They're going to be scarred. Are they really going to be scarred? Do they know you love them? Do they know you're committed to them? So they had to figure out how to go to sleep. Okay, well, that might not be a bad thing, right? So we pressure ourselves with these social discourses that pressure us. So questioning is one, because one of the findings that was significant in my study was that women who question feel empowered. And that I found out later, because I didn't continue in the field of research, that study changed the focus of research in the area of motherhood. People started looking at empowered mothers and empowering mothers more than just documenting that mothers are oppressed by this discourse. So when you question, when you say, I don't buy that, or why am I doing this? Why am I repeating this? Some of the answers may be in your own history, right? Like I myself, had an experience of trouble in my childhood. So I was going to be the outstanding mother. So my kids wouldn't feel abandoned like I did. And so when I asked myself, why am I so involved with my daughters? Of course, first I say, because that's what moms do. And most moms would agree. But if I dig, which I have, I realize that I don't want them to think of me in any other way than my mom was the best. And so I had to let go of that, because that's gone in the way of me setting some boundaries or taking care of myself sometimes. So the layers are not only the discourse, there's also your history. And in my research and in my interviews with women, that came up as well. The way their mothers had an impact in what they questioned, because the women I interviewed didn't question all of it. They questioned parts of it. And they also went with some of the parts of the discourse. So what I found is that even those of us who question will still buy into parts of the discourse and question others. You can't exist completely outside of social discourses, because then you won't really belong.
So true. One of the words that came up for me when you were describing your story is the word guilt. That guilt that we feel if we're going away for work, or if we're missing it, like you said, 2 bedtimes in a row, or you name it. There's guilt. We're a guilt-ridden society as mothers. And so maybe when we question our beliefs, we also can question our emotions. And when the guilt feeling comes up, where is this coming from? Is this coming from society, or should I be guilty right now, really? Or is this something that's coming from outside of myself? Right. And I think most of the time we'll find that the guilt is coming from outside of ourselves, and the kids are fine. In fact, they're probably better off.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
one of the interesting things is that in my study, think it was about 80 or 90% of the women didn't feel guilt.
I love it. Yes. I love it. It's something that I personally struggle with now and then. If I go away on a business trip or something like that, a little bit of guilt on, oh, so-and-so has to look after them, or my husband has to take on a bigger burden, or they're going to miss me, all the things. But at the end of the day, when you think about what parenting is, it's also paving the path. And if I want a strong, female growth trajectory for my daughter, I want her to know that she can do whatever the hell she wants when she grows up, and mom's going to go do whatever she wants to do, including yoga at bedtime sometimes, So they watch you, they watch how you treat people, they watch how you take care of yourself. And if you're constantly sacrificing your wellness and your well-being to help them out, that's, they'll think they need to do that too. And then you're perpetuating this problem, this construct. I love this idea of rebelling against social norms and picking and choosing different pieces of that from your research. Is there a takeaway that, is there one or two takeaways from your research that you kind of use over and over again when you're talking to mothers, most specifically?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, the just question, and not only about motherhood. Why do we all buy into the discourse of thinness, for example, right? Yeah. It's a discourse. Look at history, look at cultures, right? So I believe that women really need to gain their empowerment in our world. A lot of the messages, the way that patriarchal systems work, they disempower us. And we feel that in our personal little lives, we're somewhat empowered, but I think a higher level of empowerment is when you question these things that society's telling you should be or how you should be, and then come to your own conclusions. So I think that's one very important one. And the other one is, I alluded to it a few minutes ago. I used to do a lot of public speaking to parents of elementary school kids and preschool kids. And it's this understanding that kids needs to come first. Sure, if you have a newborn and they're hungry at 2 a.m, you got to get up. Diaper's dirty, you got to change it. But that's a short period. As kids get older, their needs are important, but so are yours, and so are your husbands, and so are your relationship. This idea that we have to cater to them first is really getting these children to grow up feeling entitled to being number one. And when they're not number one, they struggle. So no, you're not number one. You're one of a community, right? Watch your language when you have them participate in household stuff. They're not helping, they're participating. Because if they're helping, they're doing you a favor. You're supposed to thank them, right? But if you say, we're a community of 3 in this house, and we all work together. So meals have to be prepped, kitchen has to be cleaned, laundry has to be done. We all have to work together. This concept that mothers are there to cater to kids is problematic. And so if you change your mindset to say there's 3 human beings in this house, what are the needs of each? What are your needs as a human being, as a mom, as a person? What are your husband's or partner's needs? What are the children's needs? And then look at it. You can always do it like, okay, how much leisure time is left after all the obligations? Oh, well, we have 15 hours a week. Okay, well, I'm going to take 2 of those for me, or 3. And as a couple, we're going to take 2 or 3. And then, yes, as a family, we'll do this and so on. But to me, that's one thing that I find is burning moms out. They're burning out because they're, like you said, you have a million things on the go, and whatever's left is for them.
That's so true.
To me, that is I get passionate about it because I see it so much, you know, and we do live in a world. I grew up in Mexico where my parents always had a maid. So my mom didn't have to clean the house and the bathrooms and do the laundry. So that takes away a lot. Whereas in our world, that's very expensive to pay, you know, to get it done. So we end up having to do that as well. So your free time is very limited, right? So to really say, okay, we're going to dedicate some to the kids and to family time. But each human being needs to look at their needs and meet them.
Absolutely. I want to touch on one other thing that I think is so important. You brought up earlier in the conversation, and that is therapy for children. And the idea that we're failing if our kids need therapy, or if we put our kids in some kind of maintenance therapy even. I want to touch on that because it's something that I'm very seriously considering doing early for my children, not as a like, here's a problem, go fix it, but more as a maintenance and a third party thing. Can you touch on that and how, in your opinion, if therapy is a failure as a parent, which I think I know what you're going to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, maybe in the future, invite me again and we can touch on the whole thing of therapy and the stigma in our society, because that's another passion of mine, eliminating stigma against anything to do with mental health. But to answer your question, you know, the concept of my kids not needing therapy means I did a perfect job. So you first have to accept that that's impossible. Whether it's you or school experiences or other experiences, we will all be wounded growing up. As a mother, you have to accept that that's a reality, because that will reduce your anxiety, right? And the other one is people misunderstand what therapy is. I think people think that therapy is for the people that have a mental illness. And depends what therapists you see, but at least my approach is very skill based. So learning tools. Oh, I have an anxious mind. Well, it may be related to trauma and we can work on that. But what do you do when you have an anxious thought, right? And that's where the mindfulness therapies come in. Or, you know, I tend to be abrupt when I get angry and then I say things I don't want to say. So I would say that I'm a huge believer. If we can give these tools to children, awareness of emotions, knowing how to regulate emotions. I mean, that's huge. And so many people don't know how to do that. So that the emotion takes over. And then again, they act reactively instead of responding, as we said earlier. So the idea that, you know, there's something wrong with you if you go to therapy is quite problematic, because therapists are not there just for people who have mental illness. We have training to teach communication, to teach self-awareness, to teach self-regulation, to teach communication. So you can go to therapy to get better at those things. And yeah, schools should introduce mindfulness in schools and understanding of emotions and communication to children.
It's like a coach, right? You have no trouble having someone else teach your kid how to play hockey, but there's something wrong with having someone else teach your kid how to regulate their emotions. Like, it's just weird. We need to get over that, don't we? Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I thank you for that for me personally, because it's something that I've been thinking about very strongly lately. So where can people find you, Erika, if they want to learn more or talk to you or book a session? Where can people find you?
My website is mindfulnessyvr.com. So mindfulness YVR, because that's the code for Vancouver, YVR. You know, so they can find me there. They can find my email. I'm not currently running the mindfulness-based stress reduction class because of the pandemic. I'm still trying to sort out when is it safe to have 20 people in a room together. So hopefully in the near future. But I'm still, you know, obviously in private practice. There's a chapter that did not make it to the book because everybody told me that it didn't fit, although I did think it fit. And I still have that chapter, and that is on children's resilience. and parents understanding that kids have resilience. So if people are interested, they can email me and I can email them a PDF of that.
That sounds good. And we'll have all of this on the show notes for our listeners as well, so they can know where to find you, the link to your book, and maybe we could weasel our way into a PDF of that extra chapter as well for people. Erika, it's been such a pleasure. I've learned a lot. I'm inspired. Thank you so much for your time today. And maybe we'll have you on the show again to talk about that stigma.
That'd be awesome.
Okay,
Thank
you take care.
Having me. Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.